Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're just going to wait a moment as folks come on in. Happy Wednesday. Great to see everybody. All right. Let's go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to the Berkman Klein Center. I'm Jess Weaver on our communications team. BKC brings together the sharpest, most thoughtful people from around the world to tackle the biggest challenges presented by the internet. So welcome to our spring speaker series. Every Wednesday, we gather top academics, industry experts, and tech professionals to share cutting-edge insights on AI, social media, and more. And thank you especially to everyone here for joining us. This is our last event of the season, so we're so grateful to those of you who have joined us throughout the semester. And thank you to everyone who's just joining us here today. We really appreciate everyone's support and interest, and we're really excited to kick things off today with a team from RAND, a nonprofit, nonpartisan research organization that provides leaders with the information they need to make evidence-based decisions. I'll just be introducing Jeff Alstott, who will then introduce our other two speakers today. So Dr. Jeff Alstott is founding director of RAND's Center for Technology and Security Policy, or TASP, a 100-person team performing policy R&D on technology, competition, and risks. Jeff is also a senior information scientist and professor of policy analysis at RAND and an expert at the National Science Foundation, where he runs a program on technology forecasting and improving R&D investment returns. His government service includes time at the White House as Director for Technology and National Security at the National Security Council and Assistant Director for Technology Competition and Risks at the Office of Science and Technology Policy. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. And Jeff, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jess, and thanks to all 51 of you for being here today. As was said, I'm the founding director for TASP, RAND Center for Technology and Security Policy. Our mission is technology, competition, and tech risks. And so that has included many areas of technology, but the bulk of our attention over the past couple of years has been on frontier AI because there's been significant policymaker demand for that in both the current and previous administrations. So we'll be putting into the chat some links to TASP website so you can go check out some of the things that I'm talking about here. But at TASP, we organize a lot of our research into different research clusters, one of which is being talked about today, geopolitics of artificial general intelligence. Some other clusters that we have are AI and computing power, so things involving the export controls of compute or the machines that are used to make the fancy computer chips. AI and energy, what can be done domestically or abroad to create the energy needed, the electrical power needed to keep frontier AI scaling going and its deployment done at scale. AI capabilities evaluations. This is banging on frontier foundation models in order to understand what sort of national security capabilities they have, which could be used for good or for ill. And technology policy and governance. So this is really getting into the policy mechanics for different policymakers of if you know you want to do X, what are the actual words that you say in your sort of policy documents and how does it interact with bureaucracy structures and incentives? And then lastly, AI analysts, which is trying to automate all of TASP and all of RAND by using frontier AI to augment and do the work that our analysts are doing. So that's a little bit about TASP. I'll now hand it over to Joel Predd, who co-leads our Geopolitics of AGI initiative. Apologies that Jim Mitri, who we had advertised, is not able to be here today, but Joel is going to be able to take it away just fine. Joel, over to you. Oh, and I should also note that on the call here is Task Director of Analysis, Casey Dugan. Casey can smile and wave. So Casey helps run and provides intellectual leadership for all of our research efforts at TASP. And importantly, for the Harvard audiences here, she is based in Cambridge. So if you have follow-up questions or want to meet for coffee or something, Casey's available. Okay, now on to Joel.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks everyone for joining today. It's an honor and an opportunity for us to share some of our work. My name is Joel Predd. I'm an engineer by training, been at RAND about 20 years, and as Jeff said, presently co-lead with Jim Mitri, our Geopolitics of Artificial General Intelligence initiative, which is a team of, depending on how you count, 30 to 50 longtime Randites, more newcomers, as well as consultants that are helping through a multidisciplinary team of economists and strategists and defense planners and technologists and regional experts and geopoliticians think through the transformative potential of truly advanced artificial general intelligence for national security and geopolitics. So in the presentation we have today, we have two, maybe three objectives. The first objective is to talk a little bit about what we think of as the 5 hard national security problems posed by artificial general intelligence. And we'll get into that in a moment, but we hope that this provides sort of a framework for thinking about the many transformative effects that AGI might have on our national security. Secondly, and secondarily, we'd like to share a little bit about this initiative and active lines of research we have underway. And thirdly, we're very interested in your questions about any of the above and anything else on your mind. So please, we'll leave plenty of time for that. So we look forward to that. The starting point for our work is something that I suspect many of you know quite well, which is that leading AI companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, Google DeepMind, X, and others are racing toward increasingly advanced AI systems on the uncertain, but we think technically credible possibility that they have a pathway to artificial general intelligence. That's a term of art that is loaded with some baggage and has some controversy, but as a serviceable definition, we can think about that as artificial intelligence that can replace human cognition, if not exceed human cognition, on all or most of all economically and militarily relevant tasks. Now, some of the pathways to AGI necessitate government involvement or state involvement, either to provide some of the resources needed to advance the frontier, whether that be financial resources or energy or data or compute, or to manage the national security risks that come with such advanced artificial intelligence systems. There is another technically credible but uncertain possibility that a state actor first to cross the uncertain, potentially unknowable threshold AGI could accrue some rapid, potentially irrevocable military, economic, or scientific advantage. And in the race to accrue those benefits, actors involved could put safety or security at risk at the expense of global security and prosperity. So it's in this context that our research begins, and we have essentially one question underlying all of our work, which is basically, what should we do about it? Specifically, what should the US government do about the technically credible but deeply uncertain possibility that leading AI companies at home and abroad are on the cusp of artificial general intelligence? And whether or not they get there today or tomorrow, we will continue to live in a world for the foreseeable future where they might get there the next day. Now, there's a lot of options on the table, and there's a growing consensus among both the technologists and national security professionals that AI will be if not the defining problem for national security in the 21st century. And there's plenty of reading material to make that case, whether it be from Henry Kissinger or Eric Schmidt or Jeffrey Hinton or others. It occurs to us, and is the motivation for some of the research that we'll talk to you about today, that in thinking about strategies and plans for artificial general intelligence, many of us leave as unstated, implicit, or the assumptions about which problems exactly need to be solved. And leaving those assumptions implicit leads to divergent views and exposes us to risks that the strategies and plans that we propose could be incoherent and exacerbating the problems that we're trying to solve in the first place. So it's the motivation for our work that we'll talk about right now is to be much more clear about the problems that AGI poses so that we can address them in whole and in part in service of a more coherent strategy and plans for AGI futures. And so in particular, there are multiple frameworks, but we would propose a 5-problem framework of AGI's 5 hard national security problems. In the next few minutes, I'd just like to walk through these before I tell you a little bit about what we're doing about it here at RAND. So the first problem that we would put on the table posed by artificial general intelligence is the possibility that it could lead to what we might call a wonder weapon that rapidly, if not irrevocably, disrupts the military balance. I want to, in this, speaking about a wonder weapon, I want to differentiate it from another problem that we'll talk about in a moment, which is a more gradual shift that will be more typical of military innovation. One that, in addition to a technology innovation, requires concepts and training and force structure. By referencing a wonder weapon, we imagine something that more or less instantly disrupts the military balance. And as an example of that, historically, we can point to nuclear weapons. But what form it would take in the context of AGI is a question for analysis. It might be a splendid offensive cyber capability that takes cyber weapons from something that are very transient and ephemeral to something that we could rely on. It could be a military strategist or planner that exceeds the performance of military strategists and planners. It could be some form of advanced autonomous weapon system that allows us to scale our force structure in ways that we aren't able to do today. But among the questions that we need to address with this problem is how do we maintain deterrence in a world where we may be constantly subject to strategic surprise and the emergence of a weapon that we did not previously foresee. A second problem that I've already alluded to, which stands in contrast to the prospect of a wonder weapon, is something that occurs more gradually. It's a systemic shift in the instruments of power that alters the military or economic balance of power. We can think of AGI's influence here in referencing a different historical analogy, like the Industrial Revolution. And the precise mechanism by which this systemic shift occurs are multiple. It could be that states that embrace artificial general intelligence see their scientific enterprises grow and prosper in ways that are incomparable to those that do not. It could be those that automate their manufacturing capabilities or their workforces, or have an automated pipeline for transitioning those AI-enabled scientific discoveries into their economies, experience very rapid, if not explosive, economic growth. It could be some more systemic shift in conventional balance of power, where states that embrace the power of artificial intelligence gain some decisive strategic advantage in a way that others do not. Or it could just be a new way of conceptualizing the foundations of national competitiveness, in which actors or state actors that transition to this AGI future are prosperous and healthy and flourishing in a way that others do not. And so the second problem that we point to posed by AGI is something that occurs potentially more gradually than the last problem, in which we imagine something relatively instantaneous, to a more systemic shift in the instruments of power that doesn't occur overnight, but also doesn't occur across generations, some period of few short years. The third problem that we want to point to is the prospect that and artificial general intelligence empowers non-experts in a way that acts as a malicious mentor that allows them to create weapons of mass destruction that weren't imagined before, or that allows ones that we were able to imagine, but allows them to have access or be able to deploy them in a way that wasn't possible. And as we think about historical analogies here, we can point to Aum Shinrikyo sarin attack, but there's plenty of other examples of humans that have other ideas about humanity and would consider using AI to engineer bioweapons or cyber weapons or other forms of attack that would allow non-state actors new powers that they do not possess today. And Rand has a body of research that's both thinking about how we control proliferation, but also, as Jeff mentioned earlier, test the frontier models for their ability to give someone this kind of capability. The fourth problem that we point to is one that is often associated with loss of control or misalignment. It is often associated with science fiction, but we don't need to go to the most extreme scenarios to take this one seriously. Many of the economic and military advantages associated with advanced AI involve giving AGI agents enough autonomy and independence that they can go out and act on our behalf with their own goals. And there is the possibility that AGI agents, given such autonomy, given such independence, could act out in ways that would be fair to consider it an actor in its own right on the world stage. And how that leads to problems, of course, there are many. It could be an AI that over-optimizes on the narrow objectives that we've given them. It could be an AI that develops its own objectives that are that either are instrumental or visions its own objectives given a broad tasking. Or it could be something far more subtle in which we grow so dependent on AI that we take it for granted, and then allies or competes with humans as part of our society. And so there's all kinds of questions here that to address, among them whether we can find technical solutions to aligning or controlling independent AGI agents, but also in the prospect that we might not, how might we coexist with them in ways that we coexist with other human, state, and non-state actors today. The last problem, and perhaps one might say the most urgent problems, is the instability dynamics that have come along with all the other problems. If we are in a world where leading AI companies with support of or endorsement of state actors are racing aggressively toward the frontier of AI in pursuit of one of these other problems, what might else they do in acting out to either prevent or preserve their progress? And particularly, what might they do to prevent or preserve their progress towards some kind of a monopoly power on artificial general intelligence? Now, that might include things that are already going on, like elements of economic warfare, whether they be export controls, but would include up to and including preventive wars that we worry about. But it might also include more optimistic things, like opportunities for us to reach deals that allows humans to transition to an AGI future that is more peaceful, prosperous, and secure than the one we live in today. And so these are the 5 problems posed by artificial general intelligence for national security. And the thing about this that we think is important is that oftentimes when folks are discussing the implications of artificial general intelligence, they have one of these problems in mind. But unfortunately, we have no choice but to address them all. And so we hope that these 5 provide a kind of common language for preparing for, evaluating, or debating strategies. They can help us think about what the objectives in those strategies might be, what specifically are we trying to achieve, and note how problems, solutions or strategies that might solve one of our problems might actually exacerbate other problems. And overall, provide a rubric for evaluating alternative strategies. Now, you're very eager for your questions, but I also, before opening up, I wanted to give a little bit of a preview for the scope of research that we have underway to try to get after this. The Geopolitics of AGI initiative has been underway at RAND for about 18 months, and we left a period of diagnostic research about 6 months ago. In that prior diagnostic phase, we were very much focused on trying to get a better handle on what these AGI futures look like. And the 5 problems we just presented are sort of one of the capstone products that come out of that phase. But there's no time like the present. And so we've transitioned pretty firmly to a more prescriptive research agenda that is trying to focus much more on what do we do about it. And there's 3 main lines of research. The first line of research is what we think about as a plans and capabilities line of research. And the plans line of effort begins with the premise that the pace of progress in AI is stunning. And the capacity for governments to do something about it is quite limited, both because the technology is developed outside of government. It's being diffused primarily outside of the government in our economies. And fundamentally, governments have limited capacity to do the kind of anticipatory policymaking on the timescale that the technology is being developed. And so in that world, a world where technology is pacing with breathtaking speed and there's a limited capacity for anticipatory policymaking, it may be that our strategy for dealing with or living in AGI futures come about from our response to events, as much, if not more so, than some kind of top-down analytic or policy-making process. And so we have a large number of interdisciplinary teams developing objectively plausible scenarios. These are not science fiction scenarios. These are scenarios that could quite easily imagine could occur in the next 12 to 18 months that represent forms of crises in their own right, but crucially also represent signposts that the future might change. The future is here, and there may be a window of opportunity to pursue policies or strategies that theretofore seemed infeasible politically, financially, economically, militarily, what have you. So these scenarios are quite diverse. They would include like a sudden uptick in unemployment because AI has been adopted by the economy in ways that we did not expect. It may be AI being adopted by a non-state actor and giving someone sort of a uplift on a bioweapon. It could be a state actor or a lesser state actor employing AI to launch some kind of a cyber attack or using it to bolster their own cyber defenses. It could be some kind of non-existential loss of control event, or it could be the advent of some new military capability that AI helped innovate. All of these would, as I say, represent sort of crises for national security, but also signposts that some of our skepticism about transformative artificial general intelligence may be unfounded, creating a window of opportunity to take bolder moves than are feasible today. I could go on about that line of effort. There's an enormous amount of energy, including a weekly day after simulation in which we convene people to represent as though they're in a National Security Council type convening, confronting one of these events, having to make decisions. A second line of effort is a strategy and policy line of effort, which is really focused on a little bit more traditional for RAND, thinking through what our strategies and policies making with a starting point that isn't crisis events, but of some vision for what the future. And what we're trying to do is, given different visions for what our AGI future might look like, think about different strategies that the United States, China, other actors on the world stage might take in pursuit, and then gaming them out in a competitive environment to see how they interact. And hopefully trying to explore those that lead us to more stability, prosperity, security than we might otherwise have. And the third line of effort is an intelligence line of effort. Since so much of the development goes on in the private sector, including some of it in the open, We have an active line of effort that brings together technologists and scientists with regional specialists, including China specialists, that can read the technical literature in the language it's being written and try to get more situational awareness on global developments in AI, in AI adoption, and in robotics, adoption in the military and adoption in the economy, so that there's more early warning, if you will, there's more facts of the matter established that can guide the other two lines of effort. Anyway, with that, those are the 5 hard problems of AGI poses for national security and some of the stuff that we're doing to get after it. We would very much welcome your questions for me, for Jeff, or for Casey. Over to you. Thanks for the opportunity to share.
Great. Thank you all so much. Thanks for joining us back here. So we have a question submitted about the 5th problem. To what extent is the 5th problem inherent to competition in developing AI capabilities? Is this a wicked problem, or can it be solved or mitigated through international cooperation?
That's a great question. I think one of the features of this, I have a few reactions, and then of course I welcome Jeff and Casey to pile on if they want. The first thing to note is that often AI is considered as sort of divorced from the broader security competition that is fierce and ongoing on a daily basis. And I think one of the things you're pointing to is that it needs to be considered in the context of a complex security competition that's already underway between the US and China and others. And so it cannot be divorced. And in fact, if we are going to find our way through this, we will have to find our way through it by embracing AI as a component of a much broader security competition. That's comment number 1. Comment number 2 is there's an interesting incoherence that we see in discussions of advanced AI systems and in geopolitics. The incoherence is as follows. On the one hand, there is the premise that AI, or artificial general intelligence specific, will change everything. It's going to innovate all of science. It's going to create new military capabilities. It's going to allow us all to become poets and automate our economies, or it could kill us all. And yet all the other instruments of national power remain the same. No one would actively say that, but I think one of the things your question is pointing to is that AGI, or advanced AI at least, could create opportunities, new instruments of power that allow us to solve these problems, potentially creating windows of opportunity for new forms of cooperation or collaboration, so that it breaks the prevailing competitive dynamics between the US and China. The third question, I don't know that it's wicked or not. It's certainly very difficult, and the premise of our project is that we can gain traction on it. I think that there's a big question that many of us debate is whether or not this is best conceptualized as a problem for humanity or a problem for state actors. And I think one's perspective on opportunities for cooperation or collaboration, especially between the United States and China geopolitically, may hinge in part on how you see it. If you see this as a challenge for humanity and how we transition humanity to these AGI futures, you might see windows of opportunity for collaboration between the United States and China to navigate that transition differently than if you view it just as another technology that is a component of a security competition. So a great question, multiple answers. Welcome Jeff or Casey to weigh in if they wish.
I'm good. I think Joel got it.
Okay, great. We have a question here about cooperation and competition. So what areas do you see as cooperation points for AGI, and what about areas of competition or threat? Along the same lines, but a little distinctive.
So I'd like to frame it in terms of where using the framework of our 5 problems, if we could use that since it's top of mind, where the incentives are aligned for cooperation and where the incentives seem to be aligned competition. So in the first problem, the race to a wonder weapon, it seems inherently competitive. And so one of the things we have to really worry about is whether the uncertain but credible prospect that a wonder weapon could emerge and how that will threaten deterrence and stability given that. Clearly, problem two, the incentives are aligned for that is a systemic shift in the basis of power. The incentives are aligned for competition there as well. Now, interestingly, the third and fourth problem, I think that there are incentives that exist for the United States and China to be aligned for cooperation. Neither the United States or China have much interest in non-state actors wielding bioweapons that threaten our species or our societies. Neither, it would seem, the United States or China have interest in AI agents that have enough independence and autonomy that they can wreak havoc through our digital infrastructure, if not worse, threaten humanity altogether. And it would seem that both of us would have some interest in maintaining some stability with respect to problem 5. And again, I think that the fact that the incentives and the way they're aligned in these five problems align or misalign with cooperation versus collaboration is a virtue of this, because I think that we're going to need to find a way to find a balance between those two if we're going to navigate this transition. Hope that helps.
Great. Casey or Jeff, do you want to weigh in? We do have plenty of more. Okay, here we go. We have a question. You mentioned the development of AI analysts at RAND, as well as the breathtaking pace of AI integration throughout the economy and military generally. What, if any, processes are in place or are being contemplated for collecting input from those impacted by AI integration based on their understanding of how they will be impacted by AI integration? It seems that most people have little to no choice about how a small group of actors move forward with the rapid rate of AI development and integration, and this seems more pronounced than it has been with the case of historical technological developments.
So I suspect that both Casey and I have comments on this one. So there's two elements to this question. One, how are we at RAND endeavoring to build out AI analysts? And Casey can talk about some of that. The additional question is just overall, how should or will society handle the increasing automation of labor? This is not actually a new problem at all, right? We've had centuries of Luddites, to include literal Luddites, who are saying, "Oh no, this thing is taking whatever task or job that I did, and therefore this is the end of the world." Now, the future of AI can be qualitatively different because the set of things that humans can do is unfortunately finite, vast, but finite. And the computer software being able to automate more and more of those cognitive tasks and eventually physical tasks does mean that the space of things that are economically relevant for humans shrinks and can indeed at one point zero out. So there are sort of two different parts of the system then to be thinking about for society writ large. One is the period in which there are still things for humans to do, right? Which is not an original problem. And then the period of time in which there's nothing for humans to do, where we have full automation of labor. So Joel didn't dig into these because these have not been sort of a focus of the geopolitics of AGI, but it is a category of thing that we run into again and again, is imagining geopolitical scenarios for AGI. We observe that the US and China and everyone else will be dealing with the fact that all labor was automated and they'll have significant domestic issues. And there are multiple different ways that societies could try to sort of go through that transition. And some of them rosier than others. Joel may have some comments on this, but first I want to give Casey the opportunity to talk about at the more tactical level how we're thinking about things for the implementation of AI analysts at RAND.
Thanks, Jeff. I think it is a great question and one that I studied a lot at IBM Research. It was around human AI collaboration, right? How humans want to use AI capabilities to improve their work. I've done lots of studies around that in the past. I think at RAND, when we think about how we're going to automate the work of a RAND analyst today, what we've done is we've actually mapped out end-to-end workflows that analysts are doing today. That includes over 125 different tasks from the end-to-end processes. And we've sort of looked at how different AI tools that exist today could help with any one of those. We're sitting down with Randites to talk about how they're already using AI tools today to do some of those tasks, how we could better connect the workflows using across multiple tools. So that's one of the ways we involve stakeholders, involving them in designing new tools, understanding how they use tools today through surveys and other means. We also just brought together a convening with different people throughout, for example, nonprofits, government. This was a convening we just held 2 weeks ago at the Tony Blair Institute in DC. This was over 60 different people, people who build tools, people, like I said, who work in government, other nonprofits who are doing similar kind of work to RAND. So that's another way we're engaging stakeholders to understand.
Great. Thank you, Casey. We have a question from one of our fellows who wants to know more about your weekly day after simulation exercise.
Sure. Huge fan of this, so I could go on, but I will force myself to be mercifully brief. We ran in a prior era, invented this day after format that is an attempt to put people in an environment where they are confronting a crisis, have them make decisions, get feedback on those decisions, and at the end come back to present day to try to think about what information, policies, strategies, or capabilities we should invest in now to be better prepared for the event that we just confronted in simulation. And as I mentioned, this is very much relevant, it seems to us, to the world we're in, because we may be in a world, again, where our strategy emerges from the way we respond to events or crises, rather than some kind of top-down analytic process where RAND invents mutually assured destruction for AGI, sends a memo to the president, who then propagates it. That seems like an unlikely pathway to victory here. So we've been convening these exercises weekly, and it's part of a research design that's both trying to think through what kind of options should be available, what kind of capabilities or policy playbook should be developed in advance. But it's also a way for, as we develop policy options and capabilities in our research, get feedback on them by putting people around a table to imagine using them and to think about when they want to pull the trigger on different things. And so we do these both as part of an ad hoc process in which we have new people participate in the exercises who bring unique perspectives to the table. In fact, we expect to do one at Harvard in a few weeks here in the law school. But we also try to do it with some stable teams, so that of former officials or current officials, so that they learn along with our research, so that they might encounter the same scenario multiple times, but with better options. They may encounter different scenarios that are similar to the one they thought before, but require them to rethink the trade-offs they would make. So that was a probably overly long-winded reply, but it's an important part of our plans line of effort research design.
No, that was great. So we have a question about regulation. So specifically, given the issue of concentration of power that you mentioned, do you think antitrust regulation could help? And what about the impact of these moratorium of state AI laws do you foresee? What about the impact of those?
Jeff, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah. Interestingly, what we're observing right now is not a monopoly situation. What we're observing is multiple actors in at least the frontier model development layer of the system. So we're not entering into a monopoly situation at that layer right now. Other layers in the system, be that hyperscalers chips, the machines used to make chips, those have different sort of market dynamics. However, we have a piece which Casey or Joel may be able to find and put into the chat somewhere about what the future anticipated scenarios are for monopolies in frontier model developments. Crucially dependent upon scaling is the concept that we require ever more money to keep this going, and that the frontier models, the expensive part, the pre-training step, is sort of easily transferable across different tech stacks. And so there's no utility for somebody having done it twice. And so this is the sort of conditions you would expect to create a natural monopoly. Whether or not that comes to pass is going to depend upon certain like technical and economic questions. And so we describe in that report what will need to continue to be true for there to actually be monopolies at that layer. On the other question of moratoriums, that passed the House. In order for it to get through the Senate through budget reconciliation, it would have to get through the Byrd rule. I think Metaculus is currently putting 10% probability of that passing. So, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. So just combining a couple of questions here regarding the private sector. So folks have said, as you noted, much of the work in AGI is being done in the private sector. What entity should or could have responsibility for global regulation? Can the US and other states assume they will always have control of their own companies in such matters, with these companies kind of being actors on the world stage in their own right?
Trying to read the text. Joel may go ahead. Yeah.
I'll say something quickly, and I'm sure Jeff will have to, or Casey will have some thoughts on this. I mean, this is one of these examples, in my view, of it's hard to imagine the kind of extreme options that would be required from a policy or even legal perspective for the government to assert control over AI development until something happens. And this is an example where our plans line of effort proves really valuable. I'm not necessarily advocating that we need to plan for say, a nationalization of frontier labs. That seems neither feasible nor sensible at the moment, but there are pathways in which the technology develops where that might be an option that was on the table. And so I think it's important as a part of research that we're doing is to not arrive at such a moment intellectually bankrupt, and whether or not it's feasible or sensible today to think through both the policy mechanics, but also like the unintended consequences and benefits potentially of that, and under what conditions those options would be preferred or not preferred.
Great. In network security, is the notion of AI proofing feasible at all?
Is this Siva's question that also related to quantum?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. You're right.
Yeah,
That was
yeah.
the second part of her question that
Yeah,
you
it's
already
okay.
answered.
No, well, I can address both. So it is important with tech policy in general to not enter the regime of just saying every tech buzzword that's currently in the system, AI, quantum, blockchain, what have you, and just saying, stuff going to be different in the future. Instead, it's very useful to have very physics informed understanding of each individual technology, what it does and doesn't do, both today and tomorrow, in order to be able to sort of make effective policies. So as an example here is quantum and AI. So people often ask, oh, is AI going to be affecting things in quantum? And that is a technical question of what sort of machine learning algorithms are interface with quantum computers. And so there's the question of, are there quantum computers that can affect ML, and are there ML things that could affect quantum simulations? For the world of will quantum computers help machine learning, there's a bunch of different algorithms that could be relevant for machine learning. And I am at present not tracking a single one that would actually be meaningfully accelerated by quantum computers. Quantum computers can be useful for many things, most famously decrypting the encryption as we do it today, but also for simulating actual physical phenomena that rely upon quantum effects. But we do not yet see any sort of technically assured path by which quantum computers would aid AI, right? And that is all technical questions that you can only sort of address by getting down into the weeds. For what it's worth, my answer to that question could flip tomorrow if a mathematician, comes out with a quantum supremacy algorithm there. But what keeps happening is that we make quantum algorithms, and the classical computer scientists say, "Oh no, you didn't," and then they make a better classical algorithm, and so the classical folks keep retain territory the longest. So similarly, when talking about the future of making our network secure, when talking about quantum computers breaking encryption, well, we can talk about post-quantum encryption or quantum resistant encryption. And we have techniques for that today. They are not as pleasant to implement as the techniques that we've had for decades, but there is insufficient reason for us to be not implementing those today. Indeed, we should be trying to implement post-quantum encryption everywhere we can, not because we have quantum computers today, but because the files that we're moving around today could still exist at the future time that the quantum computer exists, and then be used to decrypt all these files. And particularly for national security purposes, right, a spicy fact today in 2025 may still be relevant in 2045 or something like that. It'd be particularly relevant for blockchain, for what it's worth, for any blockchain system that is reliant upon those encryption things. So then talking about AI proofing a network is a completely separate category of question from quantum then, right? And so now this is just asking if it is the case that your cyber warrior is able to move at machine speed and scale, what do you expect to sort of happen for network security? So we have a piece that's coming out soon that examines the sort of limit of what we expect to happen with offense and defense with cyber automation. And this is riffing off of work being done at, or had been done at Oxford several years ago, but we sort of polished it up and sort of relaxed certain assumptions. And what's observed is that if everybody has a fully automatic cyber warrior, then this privileges the defenders because the defender can be using it to red team and patch their own processes to fill up all the holes. And this is predicated on the assumption that there's a finite number of holes in your system and that they are in fact patchable. And so in that world, then somebody else having fully automatic cyber offense against you doesn't help because essentially, all the ports are closed, all the buffer overflow attacks have been identified and fixed and that kind of thing. That same sort of logic, for what it's worth, may not apply to other domains outside of cyber, where the model of a finite number of holes or all holes are patchable doesn't hold. But you can see from everything I'm describing here that when talking about tech policy, it is useful to get into the technical particulars so that you don't, spend a lot of time in sort of having anxiety about things that won't come to pass or completely missing the things that are likely inbound.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for answering that one again. Appreciate it. So question, if AGI emerges, it will at least initially be physically hosted in no more than 3 or 4 countries on Earth, and the rest will access it over the internet. How might the US approach the proliferation question in that world?
Few thoughts. I'm sure Jeff or Casey have additional thoughts. I mean, one of the things that I want to flag about your question, which is an excellent one, is that it makes some assumptions about the timelines and technical paradigm, assumptions and that are reasonable and worth planning around, but also it's worth flagging that we're making them. If an AGI were to emerge soon, it will emerge as you're suggesting in the scaling paradigm, in which very large investments in compute may be necessary to cross that threshold. And indeed, in that world, we may be able to control the proliferation of it by limiting access to the supercomputers that are involved in the training and use of it. But it's possible, also possible that, and so we could regulate access to the computer, the compute, and we have teams of people who have been thinking about that, and I'll pass it over to Jeff momentarily to talk about some of those ideas, among others. But it's also possible that that it does not occur either on those timescales, but also more importantly, that there may be an innovation algorithmically that gives rise to it. It may also be true that AGI emerges less in one singular model, but as the aggregation of many more specialized models, or less than fully general, but still quite general models, and that they've proliferated. And you can see this, how very capable models have been distilled from frontier models and deployed around the world to national security and geopolitical consequence. So using your very good question to make a couple points there. Jeff, you may have others.
Yes, as Joel described, how fast technology will proliferate is in part a function of that technology and also all the policy structure around it. And AI as software has the ability to propagate very quickly, right? The software, even as large as these large language models are, they can be readily sent over the internet, so that this isn't like hard. The more tricky thing here is about the computing power. And there's very different scales of computing power being used to train the models versus run the models, though the amount needed to run the models is considerably larger than, say, your laptop, but it is still, measured in thousands or tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars, as opposed to millions or billions of dollars. And so it will be policy decisions about where that compute used for inference proliferates to or not, what conditions will be upon them or not. You can imagine technical level sort of governance or oversight solutions that are in the chips themselves or in the computers themselves. We have a piece about that, what we called hardware-enabled mechanisms that folks have been talking about for having with chips that would allow AI to proliferate freely across a bunch of chips that are in different places on the planet. But then if the chips go where they're not supposed to be going or something like that, then we can know that because the chips have a location attestation, that kind of thing. So there's several technical and policy options available there for what the inference proliferation game will look like. I'll affirm Joel's point about the technical paradigm. The farther into the future we look, the less certain we should be that the current technical paradigm will be the technical paradigm in question, right? So I will be very surprised if in 10 years we're talking about large language models, right? So conditioning on AGI arriving then and not in a couple of years, it could be that there's pretty significantly different technical considerations at play. I'll be very surprised, though, if compute is not a major factor, because as long as AI is software, you will be limited in how much of it you can run by the amount of computing power you have. And if AI is really powerful, you will want to run a lot of it, so you'll want a bunch of computing power. And then computing power requires energy, so energy is then part of the story. So even if you don't know some of the technical particulars, you can make pretty good assumptions about what technologies will at least be relevant.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think maybe just briefly, since your ability to speculate on this might be a bit limited, but someone asked, does the U.S. military and U.S. government's national security strategy see these issues the same way as RAND?
So we're certainly not in any position to speak on behalf of the U.S. government, and I'm confident that the views and opinions vary widely on this. I think one of the things that we are trying to do with this initiative is to get ahead of the issue. So certainly it's true that AI has been a focal point or an important part of strategy for multiple administrations, including this one, and for the U.S. military for some time. the purpose of this initiative is to consider the most transformative forms of AI, artificial general intelligence, and so that we are ahead of that in providing the intellectual foundations in the moment when it's needed. So we see as the technology improves and we see better and better capabilities available to us all every day, I think that the window for relevance becomes more open. Jeff, you may have a different perspective on that.
No, I'm good.
Great, thank you. Facing the emerging risks of generative AGI, what lessons can we draw from how humanity has managed other transformative threats like nuclear weapons or cyber warfare, noting it has taken decades in other domains to make any regulatory progress?
It's a great question and one that requires a longer conversation than we probably have here. I mean, I think that there are the lessons you can take from any of these historical examples are specific and often instructive. I will say that in our research, oftentimes those historical analogies raise more questions than they answer. I don't think you can find a historical analogy that really fits. There are insights to be had, no doubt, but what's really unique about, there are many unique features about AI and advanced AI and artificial general intelligence that make it quite a bit different. One is that it's a general purpose technology in a way that many of the other transformative technologies that have disrupted national security have not been. Two, it's might be one of the first, at least in recent history, that have been developed outside the US government. And secondly, there's a very real sense in which technology sometimes is kind of not always the most useful way of thinking about it. In some ways, it's like a new species. And it's possible to get overly carried away with that line of thinking because at the end of the day, it is a technology. But the way we interact with it, sometimes it's more important to focus on the I in AI rather than the A in AI. And so for those three reasons, I think most historical analogies are somewhat limited.
Great. I think we have time maybe for one more question, and so I'll end with this one. How do your research teams distinguish between realistic and speculative concerns around AGI autonomy?
So I wrote an answer to that one, saying it aloud so that others can have it. So Rand's first publication in 1946 was preliminary design of an experimental world-circling spaceship. It was about satellites. They didn't use that term because this was literally the first piece about such a thing. And that piece coming out in 1946 came out 11 years before any satellite existed, Sputnik in 1957, and well before more useful satellites and certainly ICBMs and that kind of thing. So similarly, back in the 40s and 50s, Rand was tasked by the Air Force with figuring out what would be the warfare of nuclear bombs on missiles, while the bombs themselves at that point were still 1,000 times too heavy to go on missiles. So there's lots of tech future out there that can be reasoned about in advance, and we in fact need to reason about it in advance because it's coming at us, sort of whether we reason about it or not. And indeed, the sort of US policies on some of these issues with nukes or with bioweapons or with other things, other technologies that had significant national security concerns. Sometimes US policy was built anticipating where the tech was going and sort of what the implications would be or how it would change geopolitical situations, and others would not. An example of this is the Bioweapons Convention, where folks within the US government appreciated that bioweapons technology was going to get cheaper and cheaper, and that it was not useful for the US for everybody with a dollar in their pocket to be able to launch a bio attack. Much better for the world of mass death or the regimes, the capabilities for mass death to be reserved to rich nations like the United States. where the nuclear bombs require lots of money. And so this was very sort of explicit motivation for why the US was leaning into the Bioweapons Convention and unilaterally dropped all bioweapons and sort of egged on the Soviets and the others to drop their bioweapons. And because it was understanding how the math of this was going to shake out into the future. And so, be it on AI, AGI, or other elements of technology and security policy, it's really critical that we be looking ahead and, as Joel said earlier, not being caught by these situations totally unprepared.
Great. Well, before we let you go quickly, just wondering if there are, I know you've mentioned in the Q&A an upcoming report. Do you want to speak to that or any other reports that Rand has that are upcoming?
We are spitting out reports all the time. Casey would know the stats on average, how many come out every week or so. So I encourage you to just take a look at our website, which is at the top of the links there. And the third link is to our newsletter. So you can register for our newsletter. We put out sort of a compendium every 3 months of things that have happened, but also you can get notified for every new piece that comes out. You can also follow some of our researchers on X. So, for example, Leonard Heim has been doing a bunch of work about compute controls. And so you can see him chatting in sort of real time with his colleagues at, say, the UAE or other places. So please don't be strangers and feel free to follow through all these means.
Great. Well, just wanted to say thank you all so much. Thank you for adding extra time for the Q&A. I think folks had a lot of really excellent questions, so that was much appreciated. And really appreciate all of your insights and this thoughtful and very accessible breakdown. Thank you for being our last speakers of the series, of our spring speaker series. And thank you to everyone so much for joining us today and for joining us for the rest of this season. And we're really looking forward to seeing you all in fall 2025. So thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.